I was sitting right there when my son smiled at his fiancée and said, "Sweetheart, I made you keys to the apartment." At first I thought he meant his place. Then he placed the keys in her hand, and she looked straight at me. That way, "I can come and go anytime," she said softly. My heart stopped. Because there is only one apartment in our family that matters, and it belongs to me. I didn't say a word. I just watched them smiling, planning, deciding my life without me. What they didn't know was that I had already seen this coming. And I wasn't as powerless as they thought. If this moment made your heart tighten, you're not alone. Tell me, where are you watching from today and what time is it there? Have you ever felt pushed aside by someone you love? Share your story in the comments. And if you believe no one should lose their home or their dignity, please like and subscribe. Your voice matters here. My name is Isabella Jones, and until a few weeks ago, I believed I understood my place in this world. I am 68 years old, a retired librarian, and a widow of nearly 9 years. I spent most of my life in Chicago, in the same neighborhood where my husband Richard and I built everything we had from scratch. We weren't wealthy people, not in the flashy, showy sense, but we were careful, disciplined, and above all, steady. That steadiness became the foundation of our life, and eventually the apartment I now call home. This apartment isn't just a place where I sleep. It is the last thing Richard and I built together before he got sick. I remember the way he insisted on choosing the hardwood floors himself, even when his hands had already begun to tremble. He said, "If this is going to be your home one day, Bella, it has to feel solid under your feet." After he passed, that sentence stayed with me more than anything else, because suddenly the world didn't feel solid anymore. The apartment became my anchor. Every corner held a memory: the small kitchen where we used to argue over whether the coffee was too strong, the living room where Richard would fall asleep halfway through the evening news, the window where I still sit every morning with my tea watching the city wake up. It was never about square footage or market value. It was about safety. It was about dignity. And perhaps most of all, it was about independence. My son Michael Jones used to understand that. When he was younger, he was the kind of boy who would insist on carrying my grocery bags, even when they were too heavy for him. He used to call me every Sunday without fail. After his father died, he was the one who sat beside me at the kitchen table holding my hand while I tried to figure out how to keep going. "Don't worry, Mom," he told me back then. "You're not alone. I've got you." I believed him. For a long time, he kept that promise. Michael is 42 now, a project manager at a mid-sized construction company. He lives about 20 minutes away in a condo that he purchased 3 years ago. For a while, he would still visit, often bringing takeout, fixing small things around the apartment, checking in on me in ways that felt genuine, not forced. Then about a year ago, everything began to shift. That was when Lauren Whitfield entered his life. The first time I met her, she was impeccably dressed with a calm, practiced smile and a voice that always seemed just a little too measured. She worked in corporate marketing, something about branding and client strategy, though I never fully understood the details. What I did understand was that she was confident in a way that filled every room she walked into. At first I told myself it was a good thing. Michael seemed happy. He laughed more. He talked about the future again, marriage stability, building a life with someone. As a mother, how could I not want that for him? But it didn't take long for me to notice the small things. Lauren had a way of asking questions that didn't feel like questions at all. The second time she came to my apartment, she paused in the entryway and looked around slowly, taking everything in with sharp, observant eyes. "This is a lovely place, Isabella," she said, her tone warm but precise. "Is it fully paid off?" I remember blinking, caught off guard by the directness. "Yes," I said carefully. "It is." She smiled. "That's wonderful. It's rare these days." Later that afternoon, while Michael was in the other room taking a call, she joined me in the kitchen. "Do you find it difficult?" she asked casually. "Living alone at your age?" There was something in the way she said it, not cruel, not even openly judgmental, but subtly weighted. "I manage just fine," I replied. "Of course," she said quickly. "I just mean, things happen. Falls, emergencies. It's always better to have someone close by." I nodded politely, but something inside me tightened. At the time, I brushed it off. People worry. People project. I told myself I was being overly sensitive. But the questions didn't stop. Each visit brought a new layer. How do you handle your bills? Do you keep your important documents here? Have you ever thought about downsizing? They were always framed as concern, always delivered with a soft smile, always just enough to sound reasonable. And yet they lingered. Michael, for his part, didn't seem to notice anything unusual. Or perhaps he did and chose not to. He began repeating some of the same ideas. Mom. Have you ever thought about a smaller place, he asked one evening casually as he scrolled through his phone. I like my home, I said. Yeah, but it's a lot of space for one person. It's exactly enough space for me. He didn't argue. He just shrugged. But I could feel the conversation shifting inch by inch into unfamiliar territory. There was one moment, though, that stayed with me more than any other. It was a Sunday afternoon about 2 months before that dinner. Michael and Lauren had come over for lunch. I had made roast chicken mashed potatoes, the kind of meal that used to bring my family together without effort. At one point, Lauren stood up and wandered toward the hallway. Do you mind if I look around? She asked. I hesitated just for a second. Of course, I said, forcing a smile. She walked through each room slowly. I could hear her footsteps, measured and deliberate. When she returned, she sat down and folded her hands neatly in her lap. It really is a beautiful apartment, she said again. But this time, there was something else in her voice. Something that didn't sound like admiration. It sounded like assessment. That was the moment I first felt it clearly, the sense that I was no longer simply a mother being visited by her son and his future wife. I was being evaluated, measured, considered, and I didn't yet understand why. I wish I could say I trusted my instincts immediately, that I confronted it head on, that I protected myself from the very beginning. But the truth is, when it comes to family, we often choose comfort over clarity. We explain things away. We soften what feels sharp. We tell ourselves stories that are easier to live with. So I did what many mothers do. I stayed quiet. I watched. And I hoped, perhaps foolishly, that whatever unease I felt would fade on its own. It didn't. Instead, it grew slowly, quietly, like a crack in glass that spreads long before it finally shatters. And by the time my son placed those keys into Lauren's hand at that dinner table, that crack had already reached the center of everything I thought I could trust. If you had asked me that morning whether something was wrong, I would have said no. That was the strangest part. Nothing about the day looked unusual. Michael called around 10, his voice light, almost cheerful, in a way I hadn't heard in months. Hey, Mom, he said. How about dinner tonight? Just the three of us. There's this new place downtown, nice quiet. I think you'll like it. I remember smiling, relieved by the invitation. Of course, I said. That sounds lovely. And for a moment, it did. I took my time getting ready that evening, choosing a soft blue blouse that Richard had always said brought out the warmth in my eyes. I even put on a pair of earrings I hadn't worn in years. It felt like something was shifting back, like maybe the distance I'd been feeling was only temporary. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe things were returning to normal. That hope stayed with me all the way to the restaurant. It was one of those places that tries very hard to look effortless. Dim lighting, polished wood tables, quiet music playing somewhere in the background. The kind of place where people speak in softer voices and smile more than they need to. Michael and Lauren were already there when I arrived. Michael stood up, immediately pulling out my chair with a small practiced gesture. You look great, Mom, he said. Lauren leaned forward slightly, her smile perfectly composed. Beautiful as always, Isabella. I thanked them both, settling into my seat, trying to ignore the faint tension already forming in my chest. At first, everything felt normal. We ordered drinks. We talked about the weather, about a construction project Michael was managing, about a marketing campaign Lauren had just completed. It was surface level, polite, almost rehearsed, but not uncomfortable. Then slowly the conversation began to shift. Lauren was the first to guide it there. You know, she said, swirling her glass gently, I've been thinking a lot about what it means to build a life together. Not just as a couple, but as a family. I nodded, unsure where she was going. That's important, I said. Michael glanced at her, then back at me. Yeah, he added. We've been talking about that a lot lately. Something in his tone made me sit a little straighter. Lauren smiled again, but this time it lingered just a second too long. It's not just about love, she continued. It's about support, being there for each other, sharing what we have, making things easier for everyone involved. I felt it then, that subtle tightening in the air. I suppose that's true, I said carefully. Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows lightly on the table. Mom, he said, his voice gentle but deliberate, we just want to make sure everything is set up in a way that makes sense for the future. There it was again. The future. It sounded harmless. It always does. What do you mean? I asked. Before he could answer, the waiter arrived with our appetizers. Plates were set down, glasses adjusted, a brief interruption that gave me a moment to breathe. But when the waiter left, the atmosphere had changed. Lauren placed her hands neatly together on the table. We've been thinking about living arrangements after the wedding, she said. My stomach sank, though I couldn't yet explain why. Oh, I replied. Michael reached into his jacket pocket. It was such a small movement, so ordinary, and yet something about the way he did it, slow, intentional, made my pulse quicken. I actually wanted to show you something, he said. He pulled out a small keyring. I remember noticing the faint metallic sound as it touched the table, the way the light caught on the edges of the keys, the way Lauren's eyes shifted toward them immediately, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. Michael picked up the keyring and turned toward her, his expression softening. Sweetheart, he said, his voice warm, almost proud, I made you keys to the apartment. For a second, I smiled. It was automatic. Of course he did, I thought. They're getting married. It makes sense. I even let out a small laugh. That's a big step, I said lightly. Lauren accepted the keys, her fingers brushing against his. She looked at them for a moment, then closed her hand around them with quiet satisfaction. That way, she said softly, I can come and go any time. Something about the way she said it made my smile falter. I turned toward Michael. Your apartment, I asked. There was a pause. Just a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, Lauren looked at me, and she smiled. Not the polite, practiced smile she had worn all evening. This one was different. This one was calm, certain. Oh, Isabella, she said gently. We thought it would be easier this way. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I'm sorry, I said, my voice quieter now. Easier. How Michael cleared his throat. Mom, it's not a big deal, he said quickly. We just figured your place is bigger, it's in a better location, and it's already paid off. My place, I repeated. The words felt strange in my mouth, as if I were speaking a language I no longer understood. Lauren leaned in slightly, her tone soothing, almost reassuring. We didn't want to overwhelm you with details too soon, she said. But after the wedding, it just makes more sense for us to stay at your apartment. It's closer to my office, and honestly, it's underutilized right now. Underutilized. I stared at her, then at the keys in her hand, then back at my son. You made keys? I said slowly to my apartment. Michael shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable now. Mom, don't make it sound like that, he said. It's not what you think. Then what is it? I asked. There was a flicker of irritation in his eyes. We're just planning ahead, he said. You don't need all that space anymore. And we'll be able to help you out. Keep an eye on things. I didn't ask for help, I said. The words came out sharper than I intended. A silence fell over the table. Lauren's expression didn't change. If anything, she seemed even more composed. It's not about asking, she said calmly. It's about what's practical. Practical. I felt something inside me begin to crack. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet, steady fracture spreading through everything I had believed about my son, about my place in his life, about the safety of my own home. I looked at him again, really looked this time, at the way he avoided my eyes, at the way his hand rested near Lauren's, as if drawing strength from her presence, at the way he didn't say, "Mom, this isn't right," because he didn't believe that. He believed this was reasonable. He believed this was something I would accept. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my voice steady. When I asked, "Were you planning to tell me?" Michael exhaled, clearly frustrated now. "We are telling you," he said. "Right now." Lauren gave a small nod as if confirming that this was in fact a generous gesture. "We wanted to include you in the process," she added. "Include me. In decisions about my own home." I sat back in my chair, my hands folded quietly in my lap. And for a moment I said nothing. Because in that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't poor communication. This was a plan. A plan that had been discussed, agreed upon, and set in motion without me. And as I looked at the two of them sitting across from me, so certain, so composed, so sure of their right to decide my future, I realized something else. They thought I was already out of the way. What they didn't know, what neither of them could possibly understand yet, was that I had just begun to see the full shape of what they were trying to take, and I was no longer going to pretend I didn't. I don't remember how the rest of that dinner ended. I remember the taste of nothing food I couldn't swallow, water I didn't drink. I remember the low hum of voices around us, the soft clinking of glasses, the illusion of a normal evening continuing while something inside me quietly broke apart. But what I remember most clearly was the drive home. Michael insisted on taking me. "Mom, let me drive you," he said, already reaching for his keys before I could answer. I should have refused. I should have said I needed time, space, distance. But I nodded. Because some part of me still hoped, still foolishly believed that if I just stayed calm, stayed reasonable, this could still be explained. Fixed. Undone. The car ride was quiet at first. Lauren sat in the front passenger seat, her posture perfect, her hands resting lightly in her lap. I sat in the back watching the reflection of streetlights pass across the window like brief flashes of something I couldn't quite hold on to. Michael cleared his throat. "Mom." He said, his voice careful, "You're taking this the wrong way." I almost laughed. But there was nothing funny about it. "Then explain it to me the right way," I said. He glanced at Lauren, then back at the road. "It's just practical," he said. "You said yourself you don't need all that space." "I never said that," I replied quietly. "You didn't have to," he said, a hint of impatience creeping in. "It's obvious." I felt something shift, then not just hurt, but something colder, something clearer. And making keys to my apartment without telling me, I continued, "That's practical too." Lauren turned slightly in her seat, her voice calm and measured. "Isabella, no one is trying to upset you," she said. "We're thinking long term. You're not getting any younger, and eventually—" "Stop," I said. The word came out sharper than I expected. The car fell silent. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes fixed on the back of Michael's head. "Don't talk about me like I'm not here," I said. "And don't talk about my life like it's something you've already decided." Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "We're not deciding anything for you," he said. "We're trying to help." "Help," I repeated. The word felt hollow. "You call this help?" I asked. "Making copies of my keys, planning to move into my home, telling me I should leave my own space without even asking me first." "It's not like that," he said, his voice rising slightly. "Then what is it like?" I pressed. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled the car into my building's parking area and turned off the engine. For a moment, no one moved. Then he turned around in his seat to face me. "Mom," he said, his tone shifting firmer now, more direct. "You're 68 years old. You live alone. That's not ideal." I stared at him. "Not ideal for who?" I asked. "For you," he said quickly. "For your safety. For your well-being. And you think the solution," I said slowly, "is to take over my home." "No one is taking anything," Lauren interjected smoothly. But I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on my son. Answer me, Michael, I said. He hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. We're just trying to make things easier, he said finally. For everyone? Everyone. Except me. I opened the car door. I'm going inside, I said. Mom, he started. I need you to listen to me. I cut in, turning back toward him. No one moves into my apartment. No one uses those keys. And no one makes decisions about my life except me. Do you understand? His expression hardened. You're being unreasonable, he said. There it was. Not concern, not confusion, judgment. I felt something inside me settle then, not into anger, but into something steadier, stronger. I'm being clear, I said. And with that, I stepped out of the car and closed the door behind me. The moment I walked into my apartment, the silence wrapped around me like something familiar, safe. But that night it felt different. Not broken, but threatened. I locked the door carefully, checking it twice before setting my purse down on the small table by the entrance. For a few seconds, I just stood there, listening. To nothing, to everything. And then I saw it. It was subtle. So subtle that anyone else might have missed it. But I didn't. The cabinet in the hallway, the one where I kept old documents, insurance papers, things I rarely touched, was slightly open. Just an inch. Just enough. I walked toward it slowly. My heart wasn't racing. Not yet. Because part of me still wanted to believe there was an explanation. That maybe I had left it like that. That maybe I was imagining things. I reached out and opened it fully. Inside the folders were slightly out of place. Not dramatically, not carelessly, but just enough to tell me they had been moved, shifted, handled. I felt the first real wave of cold fear settle into my chest. I moved quickly, then walking into the living room. Everything looked normal. The couch was where it should be. The pillows were arranged neatly. The small table by the window held my teacup from that morning exactly where I had left it. But then my eyes landed on the bookshelf, and my breath caught. The framed photo of Richard and me, the one from our 30th anniversary, the one I always kept facing the window, was turned backward. Not fallen, not knocked over. Turned. Deliberately. I walked over and picked it up with trembling hands. For a moment I just stared at it, at his face, at the memory of a time when things made sense, and then I set it back in place carefully, exactly as it had always been. Whoever had been here, they hadn't just been looking, they had been searching. The thought settled in slowly like something heavy pressing down on me. Searching for what documents proof control I didn't know. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was no longer about assumptions, or misunderstandings, or awkward conversations over dinner. This was something else, something deliberate, something planned. I walked back to the front door and checked the lock again. Still intact, still secure. Which meant only one thing. They had used a key. I closed my eyes briefly. And for the first time since that dinner, I allowed myself to feel it fully. The betrayal. Not just in words, but in action, in violation, in the quiet, undeniable truth that someone I loved had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. I opened my eyes, slowly, steadily, and as I stood there, in the middle of my living room, surrounded by everything I had built, everything I had protected, everything that was supposed to be mine, I made a decision. I would not wait for this to get worse. I would not pretend it wasn't happening. And I would not let anyone, no matter who they were, take my life away from me piece by piece, not without a fight. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed with the lights off, staring at the ceiling, listening to every small sound as if it might carry meaning. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant echo of a car passing outside, the faint creak of the building settling into itself. Every noise felt sharper, every silence felt heavier. I kept replaying the same question in my mind over and over again. What were they looking for? Because that was the truth I could no longer avoid. This wasn't curiosity. It wasn't concern. It was intent. At around 3 in the morning, I got out of bed. There is something about the early hours when the world is quiet and no one is watching that makes certain decisions easier, clearer. I walked into the hallway and opened the cabinet again. This time I examined everything carefully. Insurance documents, tax returns, old correspondence. The trust folder Richard had once told me never to ignore, even if I didn't fully understand it at the time. I noticed something then. The trust folder had been moved, not taken, not opened in an obvious way, but repositioned, as if someone had checked it and put it back. My chest tightened. They weren't just guessing. They were looking for something specific, and they knew enough to look there. I closed the cabinet slowly and leaned against the wall. For years I had told myself that trust, real trust, was built on love, on shared history, on the quiet understanding between people who had lived life side by side. But standing there in the dark, I realized something I should have understood sooner. Trust, when misplaced, becomes a weapon, and I had handed it over too easily. By morning, I had made up my mind. The first thing I did was call a locksmith. "I need the locks changed," I said. "Today." The man on the other end asked a few routine questions, address type of lock availability. His voice was calm, professional, unconcerned with the reason behind my urgency. "I can be there by 10, he said. "That's fine," I replied. When I hung up, I felt a small, steady sense of control return. It wasn't much, but it was something. I made coffee, though I barely drank it. I sat by the window watching the city wake up just as I had every morning for years. But this time the routine didn't bring comfort. It brought clarity. I was no longer just a woman living quietly in her home. I was a woman whose home had been entered without permission, whose boundaries had been ignored, whose life had been quietly, deliberately targeted, and that changed everything. At exactly 10 o'clock, the locksmith arrived. He was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and steady hands. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He simply nodded as I showed him the door. "New keys only," I said. "No copies out there?" he asked. "Not anymore," I replied. He worked efficiently, removing the old lock, installing a new one, testing it twice before handing me the keys. "These are the only ones," he said. "Don't lose them." I closed my fingers around the cool metal. "I won't," I said. After he left, I stood by the door for a long moment. The apartment felt different. Not safer exactly, but more mine again. That mattered. It was just after noon when my phone rang. Michael. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. "Hello?" "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice already tense. I didn't pretend to misunderstand. "I changed the locks," I said calmly. There was a pause, then a sharp exhale. "Mom, are you serious right now?" "Yes, you didn't even tell me I didn't need to," I replied. "That's my," he started, then stopped himself. "That's the apartment we were talking about." "No," I said, my voice steady. "That's the apartment you decided on. Without me." "You're overreacting," he said, frustration rising. "We were just trying to plan ahead, and now you're acting like we did something wrong." "You did do something wrong," I said. Another pause. This one longer. "What are you talking about?" he asked. I let the silence sit for a moment before answering. "Someone was in my apartment last night," I said. His response was immediate. "That's impossible." "Is it?" I asked quietly. "Yeah," he said quickly. "You're probably just imagining things." "Maybe you forgot how you left something." "I didn't forget," I interrupted. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The cabinet was open. The documents were moved. And a photograph in my living room was turned backward. There was a shift on the other end of the line. Subtle, but real. "That doesn't mean anything," he said, though his tone had lost some of its certainty. "It means someone used a key," I replied. Silence. For a moment, I thought he might finally admit something. Explain. Apologize. But instead, he said, Mom, you're jumping to conclusions. I closed my eyes briefly, not in frustration, in understanding. This wasn't going to be easy, Michael, I said slowly. Did you or did you not give Lauren access to my apartment? Another pause. Then reluctantly, I gave her a copy of the key, yes. But that doesn't mean that's all I needed to know, I said. Mom, wait, no. I continued, my voice firm now. You don't get to dismiss this. You don't get to tell me I'm imagining things in my own home. You're blowing this out of proportion, he insisted. Am I asked. He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Listen to me carefully, I said. From this moment on, no one enters my apartment without my permission. Not you, not Lauren, no one. That's ridiculous, he snapped. I'm your son. And this is my home, I replied. The words hung between us. Clear, final. He exhaled sharply. This isn't how family works, he said. I felt something inside me settle again. That same steady, grounded clarity. No, I said quietly. This is exactly how it works when someone forgets what respect looks like. He didn't respond right away. When he finally did, his voice was colder. You're making a mistake, he said. Maybe, I replied. But it's mine to make. And before he could say anything else, I ended the call. The apartment was silent again. But this time the silence didn't feel empty. It felt intentional. I walked into the living room and sat down slowly. My hands rested in my lap, the new keys still pressed between my fingers. For years I had believed that love meant patience, that it meant understanding, that it meant giving people the benefit of the doubt even when things didn't quite feel right. And maybe once upon a time that had been true. But now I understood something different. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender. And I had surrendered enough. I looked around the room at the furniture, the photographs, the life I had built piece by piece. Nothing had been taken yet. Not really. But the attempt had been made. And that mattered, because once someone shows you they are willing to cross a line, you don't wait to see how far they'll go. You draw a new one. I stood up and walked toward the window. Outside, the city moved on as it always did, busy, indifferent, alive. Inside, everything had changed. And for the first time since that dinner, I wasn't just reacting. I was preparing. Because whatever Michael and Lauren thought they were doing, whatever they believed they were entitled to, they had made one critical mistake. They thought I would stay quiet. They thought I would step aside. They thought I would let them take control of my life without resistance. But they didn't know me as well as they thought. Not anymore. And the next time they made a move, I would be ready. The next morning, I didn't hesitate. There's a certain point in life when you realize that waiting hoping things will settle on their own is no longer an option. That point had arrived for me sometime between finding my cabinet disturbed and hearing my son accuse me of overreacting. So I did something I should have done sooner. I called Thomas Whitaker. Thomas had been Richard's attorney for nearly 20 years. He was not a warm man, not in the way people usually mean it. He didn't offer comforting words or easy reassurances. But he was precise, careful, and above all, loyal to facts, to documents, to truth. When Richard was still alive, he used to say, "If anything ever happens to me, you go to Thomas. He doesn't guess. He knows." At the time, I didn't think much of it. Now those words felt like instructions I had finally learned how to follow. Isabella, Thomas said when he picked up. His voice was as steady as I remembered. "It's been a while." "Yes," I replied. "I need to see you. Today, if possible." There was a brief pause as if he were measuring the urgency behind my request. "I can make time at 2, he said. "Bring any documents you have." "I will." His office was on the 15th floor of a quiet building downtown, the kind of place that doesn't try to impress you because it doesn't need to. The receptionist greeted me politely and directed me to his office. When I stepped inside, Thomas stood up from behind his desk. He looked older, of course, grayer, a bit thinner, but his eyes were exactly the same. Sharp, observant, unmoved by anything except what could be proven. "Sit," he said simply. I did. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he folded his hands and looked at me carefully. "What's going on?" he asked. And just like that, everything I had been holding in began to take shape in words. I told him about the dinner, about the keys, about the way Michael and Lauren had spoken as if decisions had already been made. I told him about the apartment, about the cabinet, about the photograph, about the lock I had already changed. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react. He just listened. When I finished, the room felt heavier, as if speaking the truth out loud had given it weight. Thomas leaned back slightly in his chair. "Do you have the trust documents?" he asked. I handed him the folder. He opened it carefully, flipping through the pages with practiced precision. The sound of paper turning filled the silence. After a few minutes, he nodded. "Well," he said, "this answers part of your problem." "Part one?" asked. He looked up at me. "Your apartment is protected," he said. "Legally, completely. It's held in a revocable living trust that your husband established. You are the sole trustee and beneficiary." I exhaled slowly. "And Michael?" I asked. "Has no authority," Thomas said plainly. "None. He cannot sell it, transfer it, manage it, or make decisions about it without your explicit consent." A small wave of relief moved through me. Not because it solved everything, but because it confirmed something important. I was not powerless. But Thomas continued, his tone shifting slightly. "That's only the legal side." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He closed the folder and placed it neatly on his desk. "I mean that legal protection doesn't stop people from trying," he said. "It only determines what happens after they do." The words settled into me slowly. "They've already tried," I said quietly. "Yes," he replied. "And based on what you've told me, they're not acting impulsively. They're acting with intention." I felt my hands tighten slightly in my lap. "They're my family," I said. Thomas didn't soften. "That doesn't make them harmless," he said. Silence filled the room again. Then he reached for a separate file on his desk and opened it. "There's something else you should know," he said. I looked at him, a new unease forming. "Last week," he continued, "my office received a formal request for copies of your property records." My heart skipped. "What kind of request?" "A standard inquiry," he said. "Nothing illegal on its own. But it was specific, detailed." "Who made it?" I asked. He met my eyes. "It was submitted by a third-party legal service," he said. "But the authorization listed your son's name." For a moment I couldn't speak. The room felt smaller, quieter, more defined. "He requested my property records?" I asked. "Yes." Without telling me, yes. The confirmation landed harder than anything else so far. Because this wasn't about assumptions anymore. It wasn't about interpretation. It was fact. Documented. Real. I looked down at my hands. "They knew where to look," I said slowly. "They knew about the trust folder." Thomas nodded. "That suggests prior knowledge," he said. "Or guidance from someone who understands how these things work." "Lauren," I whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a realization. Thomas didn't comment. He didn't need to. I began, then stopped. What he asked. I thought maybe I was overthinking it, I admitted. That maybe I was seeing something that wasn't there. Thomas leaned forward slightly. "Isabella," he said, his voice steady but firm, "people don't request legal documents, copy keys, and enter a property without a clear objective." I swallowed. "And what is their objective?" I asked. "To gain control," he said simply. The words hung in the air. Clear, uncomplicated, terrifying in their simplicity. I nodded slowly. "Then what do I do?" I asked. Thomas didn't hesitate. "You document everything," he said. "Every conversation, every incident. You keep records. You protect your accounts. And most importantly," he paused, making sure I was listening, "you do not give them anything," he said. "Not time, not access, not benefit of the doubt. Anything." I felt something inside me shift again. Not fear this time. Not even anger. Something steadier. More deliberate. I won't, I said. Thomas studied me for a moment as if assessing whether I truly meant it. Then he nodded once. Good, he said. He closed the file and slid it back into place. And Isabella, he added, if they push further, we take legal action. The words didn't frighten me. They grounded me. Because for the first time since all of this began, I understood the situation clearly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a family disagreement. This was a calculated attempt to take something that belonged to me. And I was no longer guessing. I was no longer hoping. I was no longer waiting. I stood up slowly. Thank you, I said. Thomas inclined his head slightly. That's what I'm here for. When I stepped out of the building, the afternoon sun felt sharper than usual. The city moved around me. Cars, passing people, walking conversations overlapping in fragments of sound. Normal life, uninterrupted. And yet, everything felt different. Because now I knew. Not suspected. Not feared. Knew. Michael hadn't just made a mistake. He had taken steps. Deliberate ones. Steps that crossed boundaries most people would never consider crossing. And Lauren hadn't been asking questions out of curiosity. She had been gathering information, piece by piece, until they thought they had enough. I walked toward my car slowly, my thoughts steady focused. They believed they were ahead. They believed they had the advantage. They believed I was reacting too late. But they were wrong. Because now I wasn't just reacting. I was informed, prepared, and for the first time since that dinner, I understood exactly what I was up against, which meant I could finally decide how to respond. And I wasn't going to do it blindly, not anymore. I had expected anger, maybe even confrontation. What I didn't expect was calm. 2 days after my meeting with Thomas Whitaker, Lauren Whitfield showed up at my door. Alone. I knew it was her before I even opened it. There is something about certain people, the way they carry themselves, the way they take up space that makes their presence unmistakable. Still, I took a breath before turning the handle. When I opened the door, she stood there with that same composed expression I had seen so many times before. Perfect posture, neutral smile, a softness in her eyes that by now I no longer trusted. Isabella, she said gently. I hope I'm not interrupting. You are, I replied. Her smile didn't falter. May I come in? For a moment I considered saying no. I should have. But something in me wanted to hear what she had to say, wanted to understand how far she was willing to go. So I stepped aside. Briefly, I said. She walked in as if she had done it 100 times before. Her eyes moved across the apartment, not openly scanning, not obviously assessing, but noticing everything nonetheless. I closed the door behind her. We stood in the living room facing each other. I appreciate you letting me come by, she began. I thought it might be better to talk, woman to woman. I folded my arms loosely. Say what you came to say, I replied. She nodded as if she respected the directness. I think things got a little tense the other night, she said. And I wanted to clear the air. Tense, I repeated. Is that what you call it? Her expression softened slightly. I understand how it might have felt, she said. But I think there's been a misunderstanding. I almost smiled. There it was. The word people use when they want to erase intent. There's no misunderstanding, I said. You have keys to my apartment. You've been inside without my permission, and you're planning to move in. She didn't deny it. That was the first thing I noticed. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her tone still calm. Michael loves you very much, she said. Everything he's doing is for your benefit. For my benefit, I repeated. Yes, she said. He's worried about you. Living alone, managing everything by yourself, it's a lot. He wants to make sure you're taken care of. I didn't ask to be taken care of, I said. Sometimes, she replied smoothly. People don't realize what they need. That did it. Something inside me tightened, not in fear but in recognition. This wasn't concern. This was control. I know exactly what I need, I said quietly. And it doesn't involve giving up my home. Lauren's smile faded just slightly. Isabella, she said, her voice lowering, let's be realistic. This apartment, it's too much for one person, and Michael is your only son. It's only natural that he would step in at some point. Step in, I asked. Or take over. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she walked a few steps toward the window, glancing out briefly before turning back to me. You have to think about the future, she said. What happens if something goes wrong, if you fall? If you can't manage things anymore, I will handle it, I said. And if you can't, she pressed. I held her gaze. Then I will decide what to do, I replied. Not you, not Michael. There was a pause. For the first time since she arrived, the air shifted. The softness in her expression hardened not dramatically, but enough for me to see what had been underneath all along. You're making this more difficult than it needs to be, she said. No, I replied. I'm making it clear. She exhaled slowly as if adjusting her approach. Let me put it another way, she said. Michael deserves stability. He deserves a place to build a life. And this apartment is mine. I finished. Silence. Her eyes met mine, steady, unflinching. And eventually, she said it will be his. There it was. Not a suggestion, not a possibility, an expectation. Something they had already decided. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Eventually, I said slowly, is not now. She didn't argue that point. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder. I brought something, she said, placing it on the table between us. I didn't touch it. What is it, I asked. A simple agreement, she said. Nothing complicated. It just gives Michael the ability to help manage things, utilities, maintenance, financial oversight. It protects you. I looked at the folder, then back at her. And what does it give you? I asked. A flicker. Just a brief one. But I saw it. It's not about me, she said. Then why are you the one presenting it? I asked. She didn't answer. Because there was no answer that would sound honest. I stepped closer to the table, but still didn't reach for the folder. I'm not signing anything, I said. Her jaw tightened slightly. You haven't even looked at it. I don't need to, I replied. Isabella, she said, her tone sharpening, you're letting emotion cloud your judgment. No, I said. I'm letting clarity guide it. The room fell silent. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she picked up the folder again, her movements slower now, more deliberate. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. Maybe, I replied. But it's mine to make. She studied me as if trying to determine whether there was any room left to push. Any angle she hadn't tried. Any weakness she could still exploit. But there wasn't. Not anymore. Finally, she nodded once. A small controlled motion. All right, she said. We'll give you some time. Time. As if this were a negotiation. As if I were simply delaying the inevitable. She walked toward the door, then paused, her hand resting lightly on the handle. One thing you should understand, she added without turning around. Michael is not going to step back from this. He believes he's doing the right thing. I felt a familiar ache in my chest at the mention of my son, but I didn't let it show. Then Michael has a lot to learn, I said. She opened the door. And so do you, she replied. Then she left. The apartment was quiet again, but the silence felt different this time. Not uncertain, not fragile, defined. I stood where I was for a moment, listening to the faint echo of her footsteps fading down the hallway. Then I walked to the table and sat down slowly. The space where the folder had been placed felt significant, like a line that had been drawn and crossed at the same time. I looked around the room, the same room I had lived in for years, the same walls, the same furniture, the same memories. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. Because now there was no more pretending, no more wondering, no more benefit of the doubt. Lauren had shown me exactly who she was. And more importantly, she had shown me exactly what they wanted. Not just access, not just convenience. Control, piece by piece, step by step. until there was nothing left that belonged entirely to me. I leaned back in my chair, my hands resting lightly on the table. For the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel confused. I didn't feel uncertain. I felt focused. Because now the situation was clear. They were not asking. They were not waiting. They were moving forward with or without my consent. And if I didn't act carefully, if I didn't stay ahead of them, they would find another way, a quieter way, a more official way, a way that didn't involve keys or conversations at all. I thought of Thomas's words. Legal protection doesn't stop people from trying. No. But it could stop them from succeeding, if I used it correctly. I stood up slowly and walked toward the hallway cabinet again. This time I didn't open it. I just stood there looking at it, thinking, planning. Because one thing was certain now. Whatever Michael and Lauren believed, whatever they thought they had already set in motion, they were not the only ones capable of making plans, and the next move would not be theirs. If Lauren's visit had confirmed anything, it was this. They weren't going to stop. Not because they were cruel in the obvious loud way people imagine. Not because they shouted or threatened or demanded openly, but because they believed they were right. And people who believe they are right can justify almost anything. 3 days after Lauren came to my apartment, Michael called again. This time his tone was different. Measured, careful. Mom, he said we need to talk. As a family. I knew immediately what that meant. When I asked. Sunday, he replied. At Aunt Margaret's place. She agreed to host. My chest tightened slightly at the mention of my sister. Margaret Collins had always been the one who kept everyone together holiday dinners, birthdays, the quiet glue that held our scattered family in place. If Michael had involved her, this was no longer private. Who's going to be there, I asked. Just family, he said. Aunt Margaret, Uncle David, maybe Cousin Emily. Nothing dramatic. Nothing dramatic. I almost laughed. I'll be there, I said. Sunday arrived with a strange kind of stillness. I dressed carefully, choosing neutral colors, something simple and composed. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I understood something now. Appearances matter. Especially when someone is trying to rewrite your reality. Margaret's house was warm, familiar, filled with the scent of something baking in the kitchen. For a brief moment, stepping inside felt like stepping back into a version of life where things were uncomplicated. But that feeling didn't last. Michael and Lauren were already there. So were David and Emily. Everyone was seated in the living room, their conversations soft, slightly strained. The moment I walked in, the room shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. Margaret came toward me immediately, her arms wrapping around me in a quick embrace. I'm glad you came, she whispered. Something in her tone told me she didn't fully understand what was happening. Not yet. I wouldn't miss it, I replied. We all sat down. Michael positioned himself slightly forward as if preparing to lead something. Lauren sat beside him, calm as ever, her hands folded neatly in her lap. And then without ceremony, it began. Thanks for coming, everyone, Michael said. I know this might feel a little unusual, but we're here because we're concerned about Mom. There it was. Concern. The word they used to justify everything. I said nothing. I simply watched. We've noticed some things lately, he continued. Small things, but enough to make us think it's time to have a conversation. David frowned slightly. What kind of things, he asked. Michael hesitated for just a second, just enough for me to see that this part had been rehearsed. Confusion, he said. Forgetting where things are. Overreacting to situations. I felt Margaret's hand tighten slightly around mine. Lauren leaned in just enough to be heard. It's very common at this stage, she said gently. We just want to make sure Isabella has the support she needs. Support. Control. They were becoming interchangeable in her language. I looked around the room, at the faces of people who had known me for decades, at the subtle uncertainty in their eyes, at the way doubt, small, quiet, dangerous, was beginning to form. And I understood exactly what this was. Not a conversation, a setup, a narrative. One that positioned me not as a person, but as a problem. I took a slow breath, and then I spoke. "I'm not confused," I said. The room fell silent. Michael shifted in his seat. "Mom, no one is saying you just did," I interrupted. My voice wasn't loud, but it was steady, clear. "You said I'm forgetting things, overreacting, that I need help managing my life." I looked directly at him. "Is that correct?" He hesitated. "Yes," he said finally. "Then let's talk about facts," I replied. Lauren's expression didn't change, but I could feel her attention sharpen. "Last week," I continued, "someone entered my apartment without my permission." Michael opened his mouth. "I wasn't finished," I said. He stopped. The cabinet where I keep my documents was opened. Files were moved, and a personal photograph was deliberately turned backward. I let the words settle. "Those are facts," I said. No one spoke. I reached into my purse slowly and pulled out my phone. I also have a record I added of a request made for copies of my property documents, filed under Michael's name. David sat up straighter. "Is that true?" he asked. Michael's face flushed. "It's not what it sounds like," he said quickly. "I was just planning I finished." Lauren spoke this time, her tone smooth. "We were trying to understand the situation better," she said. "There's nothing wrong with being informed." "Informed?" I repeated. "Or prepared." Margaret looked between us, her confusion deepening. Prepared for what she asked. Silence. And in that silence I saw it. The moment where the story they had constructed began to crack. Because stories only work when no one questions them. And I was questioning everything. "I'll tell you what this is," I said. I leaned forward slightly, my voice still calm but unmistakably firm. "This is an attempt to create a narrative where I am no longer capable of making my own decisions." Michael shook his head. "That's not true. So that someone else can make them for me," I continued. Lauren's eyes met mine, unblinking. "And who would that be?" I asked. No one answered, because the answer was obvious, and saying it out loud would make it real. I sat back in my chair. "I am not incapable," I said. "I am not confused, and I am not giving control of my home or my life to anyone." The room was completely still now. Margaret's hand was still holding mine, but her grip had changed, less uncertain, more supportive. Emily looked down, clearly uncomfortable. David crossed his arms, his expression thoughtful. And Michael. Michael looked like he was losing something. Not control, but certainty. "Mom," he said, his voice softer now. "You're taking this too far." I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "You didn't take it far enough." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," I replied, "you thought you could do this quietly, gradually, without me noticing." I paused. "You were wrong." Lauren spoke again, but there was a slight edge in her tone now. "No one is trying to take anything from you," she said. "Then why does it feel like everything I have is being discussed as if it already belongs to someone else?" I asked. She didn't answer, because she couldn't. The truth had moved into the room, and once it's there, it doesn't leave easily. I stood up slowly. "I'm not signing anything," I said. "I'm not agreeing to anything, and I'm not stepping aside." I looked at Michael one last time. "You want to talk about family," I said quietly. "Then start acting like one." And with that, I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. Margaret stood up quickly. "Isabella." "I'm all right," I said gently. I turned the handle and stepped outside. The air felt cooler, sharper, cleaner. Behind me, I could hear voices starting to rise. Questions, confusion, the unraveling of something that had been carefully constructed. But I didn't go back, because I knew something now. They had tried to define me, to reshape me, to reduce me to a version of myself that was easier to control. But they had failed. And more importantly, they had shown their hand, which meant the next move would be mine. The morning after the family meeting, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Not peace, not comfort. Clarity. There is a difference. Peace is something you arrive at after everything settles. Clarity is what comes when everything sharpens. And everything in my life had just sharpened. I no longer wondered what Michael and Lauren were doing. I knew. I no longer hoped it would resolve itself. It wouldn't. And most importantly, I no longer doubted my instincts. They had been right from the beginning. I sat at my kitchen table, the same place where I had shared countless quiet mornings with Richard, and I wrote something down on a small piece of paper. 3 words: document everything. Thomas's voice echoed in my mind as I looked at it. It sounded simple, but it wasn't. Because documenting meant facing the truth, not just feeling it. It meant turning moments into evidence. And that meant I had to stop being a mother just for a while and start being a witness. The first thing I did was call my bank. "Good morning, this is First Lake Financial," the woman on the line said. "How can I assist you today?" "My name is Isabella Jones," I said. "I need to confirm something regarding my account." After verifying my identity, I got straight to the point. "I received a call about a request to add an authorized user to my account," I said. "I did not approve that request. I need to know exactly what happened." There was a brief pause as she pulled up my file. "Yes, Ms. Jones," she said. "There was an attempt submitted 2 days ago to add a secondary authorized user, submitted by whom I asked. The request listed Michael Jones," she said. I closed my eyes for a moment. "Was it approved?" I asked. "No," she replied. "It was flagged for verification since it did not match your usual authorization patterns." Relief moved through me, but it was short-lived. "Do you have a record of that request?" I asked. "Yes, we do." "I want a copy," I said, "and I want a note placed on my account that no changes are to be made without my direct in-person authorization." "Of course," she said. "We can do that." When I hung up, my hands were steady. Not because it didn't affect me, but because it confirmed something undeniable. They weren't just planning, they were acting. The next call was harder. Not because of what I had to say, but because of who I had to say it to. I dialed Michael's number and waited. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Mom," his voice was cautious. "Good," I thought. "Let it be. We need to talk," I said. A pause. "I thought we already did," he replied. "Not like this," I said. Another pause. Then, "All right, what is it?" I didn't soften my tone. "I spoke to my bank this morning," I said. "They confirmed that a request was made to add you as an authorized user on my account." Silence. Longer this time. Then, "Mom, I was just trying to—" "Don't," I said. He stopped. "Don't tell me you were trying to help," I continued. "Don't tell me it was for my benefit. Just answer the question." I let a moment pass. "Did you submit that request without my permission?" Another pause. Then quietly, "Yes." The word landed harder than anything else so far. Because it wasn't defensive. It wasn't justified. It was simply true. Why, I asked. He exhaled. "I was trying to make things easier," he said. "If something happens, I need to be able to access your accounts, pay bills, handle things." "You mean control them," I said. "That's not fair," he replied quickly. "I'm your son." "And I'm your mother," I said. "That doesn't give you the right to make decisions for me behind my back." "I wasn't trying to go behind your back," he insisted. "Then why didn't you ask me?" I asked. Silence. Because there was no answer that didn't expose the truth. "I thought you'd say no," he said finally. There it was. Honest. And devastating. "So you decided to do it anyway," I said. "I was going to tell you," he added quickly, when I asked. After it was already done, he didn't respond. Because that was exactly the plan. I took a slow breath. "Listen to me carefully, Michael," I said. "This stops now." "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice tightening. "It means no more requests, no more access, no more decisions made without me." "I'm trying to protect you," he said. "No," I replied. "You're trying to position yourself." "That's not true," he snapped. Then prove it, I said. Silence again. If this is about protecting me, I continued, then respect my ability to protect myself. And if something happens, he pressed, then I will decide who helps me, I said. The firmness in my voice surprised even me, but it felt right, because it was true. There was a long pause on the line. Then his voice softened. Mom, why are you shutting me out? The question almost broke something inside me. Almost. I'm not shutting you out, I said quietly. I'm drawing a line. A line, he repeated. Yes, I said. Between love and control. He didn't speak. Neither did I. And in that silence, something shifted. Not repaired. Not resolved. But exposed. I didn't think you'd react like this, he said finally. I didn't think you'd do this, I replied. Another pause. Then more quietly, what happens now? I looked down at the piece of paper in front of me. Document everything. What happens now, I said slowly, is that I protect what's mine. That sounds like you don't trust me, he said. I didn't answer immediately, because trust wasn't something I could pretend existed anymore. Right now, I said carefully, I trust what I can verify. The words were calm, but they carried weight. You're treating me like a stranger, he said. No, I replied. I'm treating this situation like it deserves to be treated. He exhaled, frustration creeping back in. This is getting out of hand, he said. No, I said. It's finally being handled. And before he could respond, I ended the call. I sat there for a long moment after the line went silent. Not moving, not thinking, just breathing. Because every conversation like this takes something out of you, even when you know you're right. Even when you know you have no choice. I looked around the apartment again, at the walls, the furniture, the life I had built. Everything was still here, untouched, but the threat was real, and now documented. I reached for my notebook and began to write. Date, time, details of the call, what was said, what was admitted, every word, every pause, every truth. Because this was no longer just a family situation. It was a pattern, and patterns can be proven. As I wrote, I realized something that hadn't been clear before. This wasn't just about keys, or documents, or accounts. It was about something deeper, something more dangerous. Control doesn't happen all at once. It happens gradually, quietly, step by step, until one day you look around and realize nothing belongs entirely to you anymore, but they had made one mistake. They started too soon, and I noticed, which meant I could stop it before it went any further. I closed the notebook and placed it carefully on the table. Then I looked at the door. The new lock, the keys in my hand, still mine, for now. And as I sat there in the quiet space that had once felt so certain, I understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't over, not even close, because people who are willing to cross one line rarely stop there, and the next move would come soon. By the end of that week, I stopped waiting for things to happen. I started shaping them. There is a difference between reacting and planning. Reaction is immediate, emotional, often necessary, but planning is something else entirely. It requires distance, control, the ability to see not just what is happening, but what will happen next. Michael and Lauren believed they were ahead of me. They believed they had time. They believed I was still trying to catch up. They were wrong. I decided quietly and deliberately that if they were going to move in the shadows, I would bring everything into the light, but not all at once, not carelessly, carefully, strategically. The first step was simple. I called Michael. I've been thinking, I said, keeping my voice measured, almost hesitant. There was a pause on the other end. That's good, he replied cautiously. About what? About everything I said. The apartment. The future. What you said. Maybe I was too quick to shut it down. I could almost hear the shift in his breathing. You mean that he asked? I'm trying to be practical, I said. Like you said. Silence. Then softer now. That's all I wanted, Mom. I closed my eyes briefly. No, I thought. That's not all you wanted. But I didn't say it. I don't want us fighting, I continued. If we're going to figure something out, we should do it together. Another pause. Then Lauren will be glad to hear that. Of course she would. I'd like you both to come by this weekend, I said. We can talk. Calmly. Yeah, he said quickly. Yeah, that sounds good. We ended the call shortly after. I placed my phone down carefully on the table. My hands were steady. But my heart felt heavier. Because this was the part no one talks about. The part where you have to pretend. Where you have to sound open when you're guarding yourself. Where you have to invite people in so you can finally see what they're willing to do when they think they've already won. The second step was more important. I had security cameras installed. Not just one. Several. Small, discreet, positioned carefully by the front door in the hallway near the bedroom. The technician asked if I wanted motion alerts sent to my phone. Yes, I said. All of them, yes. When he left, I walked through the apartment slowly checking each angle, each blind spot, each corner. I wasn't just protecting my home, I was preparing a record. Because if they crossed the line again, I wouldn't just know, I would prove it. The third step required something else. Restraint. On Saturday morning, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote down exactly what I was going to say and what I wasn't. No accusations, no confrontations, no emotion, just observation, because emotion clouds evidence, and I needed everything to be clear, precise, undeniable. They arrived just after noon. Together. Lauren stepped in first, her smile warm, her posture relaxed. Isabella, she said, thank you for having us. Michael followed, his expression softer than I had seen in days. Mom, he said, I'm glad we're doing this. I nodded. So am I replied. I led them into the living room. We sat. There was a brief moment of silence, the kind that comes before something important begins. Then I spoke. I've been thinking about what you both said, I began. About planning ahead. About making things easier. Michael nodded, encouraged. Exactly, he said. That's all we've been trying to do. Lauren smiled slightly, her eyes watching me carefully. And I understand that, I said. At least, I'm trying to. That was enough to lower their guard. I could see it. The slight shift in posture. The subtle relaxation. Good, I thought. However, I continued, there are things that need to be clear. Michael's expression tightened just a little. Like what he asked. Like boundaries, I said. Lauren's smile didn't change. Of course, she said. That's important. Yes, I replied. It is. I paused. Let the silence settle. Which is why I need to understand something, I said. Before we go any further. They both leaned in slightly. Understand what Michael asked. I looked at him. Then at her. Whether I can trust you, I said. The words landed softly, but heavily. Michael frowned. Mom, why would you even ask that? Lauren spoke before I could answer. Trust is built through cooperation, she said smoothly. That's what we're trying to do here. I nodded slowly. Then let's cooperate, I said. I stood up. I made coffee, I added. Let me grab it. Neither of them objected. I walked into the kitchen, my movements calm, unhurried. But inside, I was counting seconds. Because this was the moment. The moment Thomas had warned me about. The moment when intention reveals itself, not through words, but through action. I stayed in the kitchen longer than necessary, long enough. Then quietly, I moved toward the hallway, but not into the living room. Instead, I stepped just out of sight, and I waited. At first, there was nothing. Just the low murmur of their voices. Indistinct. Careful. Then, movement. Soft. Deliberate. A chair shifting slightly. Footsteps. Not toward the kitchen. Toward the hallway. My breath slowed. Steady. Measured. I didn't move. I didn't interrupt. Because this was what I needed. Proof. I heard a door open. My bedroom. A pause. Then the faint sound of something being moved. Drawers. Careful. Controlled. Searching. Exactly as before. My phone vibrated softly in my hand. Emotion alert. I didn't even need to check. I knew, but I did anyway. Just to confirm. And there it was. On the screen. Clear. Undeniable. Michael. Standing in my bedroom. Opening drawers. Looking through things that were not his to touch. Not his to question. Not his to take. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger. Not shock. Something quieter. Colder. Final. Because this was the moment where doubt disappears. Where possibility becomes certainty. Where suspicion becomes truth. I stepped back into the kitchen, poured the coffee, took a breath, and walked into the living room as if nothing had happened. Lauren was sitting exactly where I had left her, composed, still, waiting. Michael returned a few seconds later, his expression neutral. Too neutral. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yes," he said quickly. "Of course," Lauren added. I nodded and placed the coffee cups on the table. Then I sat down, slowly, deliberately, and looked at them. Really looked this time. At the people I had trusted. At the people who believed they were one step ahead. At the people who had just made a mistake they couldn't undo. "Good," I said quietly, because now I had exactly what I needed. I didn't confront them that afternoon. That would have been too easy, too emotional, too incomplete. Because when people believe they are still in control, they reveal more. They relax. They make mistakes. And I needed more than a single moment. I needed a pattern clear, undeniable, impossible to dismiss. So I smiled. I drank my coffee. I let them talk about future planning and family support, and shared responsibility as if those words still meant what they pretended they meant. And all the while I listened. Not as a mother, but as a witness. 3 days later, Michael called again. "Mom," he said, his voice lighter than I expected, "we're finalizing the engagement party details. It's going to be at the Lakeshore Ballroom next Saturday. We'd really like you there." Of course they would. A public setting. A celebration. A stage. "I'll be there," I said. There was a pause, then a note of relief in his voice. "Good," he said. "That means a lot. To him. Or to the image he wanted to maintain. Either way, I had already made my decision. If they wanted a stage, I would give them one. The week leading up to the party was quiet on the surface, but beneath it, everything was moving. I met with Thomas Whitaker again. I showed him the footage, clear video of Michael entering my bedroom, opening drawers, searching through personal belongings without permission. He didn't react emotionally. He simply nodded. "This is strong," he said. "Very strong. And the bank request I asked." "Documented," he replied. "Combined with this, it establishes a pattern of unauthorized attempts to access your property and finances." I sat back in my chair. "Is it enough?" I asked. "It's more than enough," he said. "The question isn't whether you have proof. The question is how you want to use it." I thought about that for a long moment. "I don't want a quiet solution," I said finally. Thomas studied me carefully. "Then you need to be prepared for consequences," he said. "For everyone involved." "I am," I replied. And I meant it. Saturday night arrived colder than expected. The Lakeshore Ballroom was exactly what you'd imagine, elegant, polished, filled with soft lighting and carefully arranged tables. Guests moved through the space in formal attire, glasses in hand, voices blending into a low, constant hum. From the outside, it looked perfect. A celebration of love. A beginning. But I knew better. Because sometimes the most important endings are hidden inside beginnings. I arrived early, not to make an entrance, but to prepare. Thomas was already there, standing near the back of the room. He gave me a small nod as I approached. "Everything is ready?" I asked quietly. "Yes," he said. "Whenever you are." I took a breath and nodded. The room filled quickly. Family, friends, colleagues, people who knew Michael, people who knew Lauren, people who believed they were there to celebrate something joyful. Margaret was among them. She spotted me almost immediately and came over. "You came," she said, relief in her voice. "Of course," I replied. She looked at me more closely. "You seem calm," she said. "I am," I answered. She hesitated. "Isabella, whatever happens tonight, it needs to happen," I said gently. She didn't ask anything else, because something in my voice told her not to. Michael took the stage about an hour into the evening. Lauren stood beside him, radiant, composed, exactly as she always presented herself. He raised his glass. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "This means everything to us." Applause, smiles, warmth. And before we continue, he added, "I want to thank someone very special." He looked directly at me. "My mother, Isabella," he said, "for everything she's done for me, and for supporting us as we start this new chapter." There it was. The narrative. Carefully constructed, publicly reinforced. He smiled. "We're excited to begin our life together," he continued. "And thanks to her generosity, we'll be starting that life in a place that already feels like home." The words settled into the room. Subtle, but intentional. Lauren's smile widened slightly. And I saw it. The certainty. The belief that this moment had already been won. I stood up, slowly, calmly, and every eye in the room turned toward me. Michael's expression shifted just slightly. "Mom," he said. I walked forward, my steps steady, deliberate. I think I said, my voice carrying easily through the room, "There's something that needs to be clarified." Silence fell almost instantly. Lauren's smile didn't disappear, but it tightened. "What do you mean?" Michael asked. I reached into my bag and handed a small device to Thomas. He stepped forward, connecting it to the screen behind the stage. A soft click, then light. The screen came to life, and the room changed. Because suddenly this wasn't a celebration anymore. It was evidence. The first video played. Clear. Undeniable. Michael entering my apartment. Looking around. Moving with quiet urgency. Then opening my bedroom door. Searching. Drawers, closets, personal belongings. Gasps moved through the room. Soft at first. Then louder. Michael froze. "What is this?" he said, his voice sharp, defensive. I didn't answer, because the second video was already playing. Lauren, inside my apartment, moving through the hallway, opening cabinets, examining documents. Careful, precise, intentional. The room fell completely silent. No more whispers, no more movement, just truth. Displayed. Unavoidable. Michael turned toward me. "Mom, this isn't," don't I said. One word. And he stopped. I stepped forward slightly, my voice calm but unshakable. "You made copies of my keys without my permission," I said. "You entered my home without my knowledge. You searched through my personal belongings, and you attempted to access my financial accounts." Each statement landed heavier than the last. I looked at the room, at the faces that had come to celebrate. Now witnessing something entirely different. "This is not support," I continued. "This is not family. This is control." Lauren finally spoke. "This is being taken out of context," she said, her voice controlled but tighter now. "We were trying to what I asked." She didn't answer, because there was no version of this that could be explained away. Michael stepped forward, his composure breaking. "Mom, you're humiliating us," he said. I met his eyes. "No," I replied. "You did that yourselves." Silence. Heavy. Final. I turned slightly, addressing not just them, but everyone. "I am not confused," I said. "I am not incapable. And I am not giving up my home." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to, because the truth was already louder than anything I could say. I looked back at Michael one last time. "You wanted to make decisions about my life without me," I said quietly. "Now you get to face the consequences of that." No one spoke. No one moved. Because there was nothing left to say. The illusion had been broken, and there was no putting it back together. I turned and walked away from the stage. Not quickly, not dramatically, just completely, leaving behind the noise, the shock, the unraveling. And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel like I was losing something. I felt like I had taken it back. The silence that followed me out of that ballroom felt louder than anything I had said on that stage. It clung to me as I walked down the long corridor past the polished walls and soft golden lights that now felt almost unreal. Behind me, I could hear the distant rise of voices, confused, shocked, unraveling into fragments of questions and disbelief. But I didn't turn back. Not once. Because I knew that whatever was happening in that room, it had already changed. And so had I. I didn't make it all the way to the exit before I heard my name. "Mom, wait, Michael." Of course. I stopped. Not because I wanted to, but because some part of me, some small, stubborn part that still recognized him as the boy who once held my hand across a busy street, needed to hear what he would say. I turned slowly. He was coming toward me quickly, his face pale, his expression somewhere between anger and panic. "What was that?" he demanded. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in days, I saw something different. Not confidence, not certainty, fear. That I said calmly was the truth. "You humiliated me in front of everyone," he said, his voice rising. "I showed them what you did," I replied. "The humiliation came from that, not from me." "That's not fair," he snapped. "You twisted it. You made it look I didn't have to make it look like anything I said. It was already there." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. "You didn't have to do it like that," he said. "You could have talked to me. We could have handled it privately." I felt something shift again, not in anger but in recognition. "Privately," I repeated. "Like when you copied my keys without telling me. Like when you requested access to my accounts behind my back. Like when you stood on that stage and announced plans for my home as if I had already agreed." He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Lauren's voice cut in from behind him. "Michael." We both turned. She was standing a few steps away, her posture still composed, but the calm perfection she usually carried was fractured now. Not gone, but strained. Pressed. "Let's go," she said quietly. He didn't move. "This isn't over," he said, looking at me again. I held his gaze. "No," I said. "It's not." Lauren stepped closer. "You didn't have to do this," she said, her tone controlled but sharp at the edges. "I did," I replied. "You've destroyed something important tonight," she continued. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "I revealed it." Her jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake," she said. "Maybe," I replied. "But it's one I can live with." There was a long pause. Then Michael spoke again, quieter now. "You think I wanted this?" he asked. The question caught me off guard, not because of the words, but because of the tone. There was something in it. Something real. "I think you made choices," I said. "I was trying to build a life," he said. "A future. Something stable." "And you thought the way to do that," I replied, "was to take control of mine." He looked away. Just for a moment. But that moment told me everything. "I didn't think of it like that," he said. "That doesn't change what it is," I answered. Lauren stepped in again, her voice firmer now. "This isn't just about you, Isabella," she said. "This is about a couple trying to start their lives together. You have resources. You have space. You have options. And I have rights," I said. Silence. Because that word ends arguments. Rights don't negotiate. They don't adjust. They don't yield to convenience. Michael let out a slow breath. "So what now?" he asked. The question hung there. Simple, heavy, real. I took a moment before answering. Because this was the part that mattered most. Not the exposure, not the confrontation, the consequence. "What happens now," I said slowly, "is that you live with what you've done." His expression tightened. "That's it?" he asked. "You're just going to cut me off?" I felt the weight of that question. Not because it was difficult to answer, but because it shouldn't have been necessary at all. "I'm not cutting you off," I said. "I'm setting boundaries. That feels the same, he replied. It shouldn't, I said. Not if you understand why they exist. He didn't respond. Because understanding requires acceptance. And he wasn't there yet. Lauren exhaled sharply. This is pointless, she said. We're not going to stand here and be judged like this. I looked at her. You're not being judged, I said. You're being held accountable. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't argue, because even she knew there was no argument left to make. Come on, she said to Michael. This time he hesitated. He looked at me again, longer, as if trying to find something, an opening, a softness, a version of me that would step back, apologize, undo everything that had just happened. But that version didn't exist anymore. Not tonight. Mom. He said, his voice quieter now. I waited. I didn't think you'd go this far, he admitted. I nodded slowly. Neither did I said. That seemed to land harder than anything else, because it was true. This wasn't who I had been, but it was who I needed to be now. He stood there for another moment. Then finally, he turned. Lauren didn't wait. She walked ahead, her steps sharp-controlled, carrying her out of the corridor without looking back. Michael followed a few seconds later. Slower. He paused once at the corner, just briefly. Then he disappeared too. The hallway was quiet again. Still. Empty. I stood there for a long moment, letting everything settle. The confrontation, the truth, the break, because that's what it was. Not a disagreement, not a misunderstanding. A break. Clean, clear, irreversible. And yet, there was something else beneath it. Not relief, not satisfaction. Something more complicated. Grief. Because no matter how justified something is, loss still feels like loss. I leaned against the wall, briefly closing my eyes, and for a moment I allowed myself to feel it. The weight of what had just ended. The reality of what might never be the same again. Then I opened my eyes, straightened, and walked toward the exit. Because standing still doesn't change anything. Moving forward does. Outside, the night air was colder, sharper, but it felt real, grounded. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Behind me, the ballroom still glowed with light and sound, voices, rising conversations, shifting, the aftermath unfolding in ways I didn't need to witness. Because my part in it was done. Or at least, that part was. Because I knew something now. This wasn't the end of the story. Not for Michael. Not for Lauren. And not for me. Because consequences don't happen all at once. They unfold, piece by piece, choice by choice. And tonight was just the beginning. The morning after the engagement party, the world did what it always does. It kept moving. Cars passed. Phones rang. Coffee brewed. Somewhere someone laughed about something that had nothing to do with me. And yet my world felt quieter. Not empty, but rearranged. Because once the truth is spoken out loud, once it's seen, witnessed, impossible to deny it, doesn't just disappear. It settles. It reshapes things. It redraws lines that can't be ignored anymore. I stood in my kitchen holding a cup of coffee I hadn't touched and looked around my apartment. Nothing had changed. The same light filtered through the window. The same furniture stood exactly where it had always been. The same photograph of Richard sat on the shelf facing forward now, exactly as it should. And yet everything felt different. Because now, this space wasn't just my home. It was something I had defended, protected, claimed again. At 10 o'clock, I sat down at my dining table and opened my notebook. The same one where I had been documenting everything. Dates, times, conversations, actions, truth. I flipped through the pages slowly. The dinner, the keys, the cabinet, the bank request, the footage, the confrontation. Each entry felt like a step. Not toward conflict, but toward clarity. And now it was time for the next one. I picked up my phone and called Thomas Whitaker. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," I replied. I'm ready. There was no need to explain what I meant. He understood. I'll prepare the paperwork, he said. Come in this afternoon. I will. By 2 o'clock, I was sitting in his office again. This time, the folder in front of him was thicker, more deliberate. This, he said, sliding it toward me, is a formal update to your estate plan. I opened it carefully. Inside were documents clear, precise, legally binding. Your son is no longer listed as having any decision-making authority, he explained. Not in financial matters, not in property management, not in medical directives. I nodded. And the apartment, I asked. Remains fully protected within the trust, he said, with additional clauses now restricting any transfer or occupancy without your explicit written consent. I read through the pages slowly. Every line felt like a boundary. Defined, enforced, real. And this, I asked, pointing to another section, that he said is a formal notice documenting unauthorized entry and attempted financial access. I looked up at him. It doesn't initiate legal action yet, he continued, but it establishes a record. If they cross the line again, we proceed. I sat back slightly. And if they don't, I asked. Then it remains a warning, he said. A warning. I thought about that, about what it meant. Not punishment, not revenge. A line, clear and visible. I picked up the pen and signed. The next step was harder, not legally, emotionally. I had to decide whether to involve the police. Thomas had made it clear. Unauthorized entry, attempted financial access. Both were enough, but calling the police would change things permanently. Not just for Michael, for me, for whatever remained of our relationship. I sat in my car for a long time after leaving the office, the engine off, the world moving around me, and I asked myself a question I hadn't fully faced yet. What do I want now? Not what I needed to protect. Not what I had to do. What I wanted. The answer came slowly, but clearly. I didn't want to destroy my son. I didn't want to see him punished in a way that couldn't be undone. But I also didn't want to pretend nothing had happened. So I chose something in between. I would file a report. Documented. Official. But not escalated. Not yet. Because accountability doesn't always require destruction. Sometimes, it requires consequence without finality. The police station was quiet, orderly, efficient. The officer I spoke to listened carefully as I explained everything. The keys, the entry, the footage, the bank request. He didn't interrupt, didn't question my credibility. He simply took notes. Do you have evidence, he asked. Yes, I said. I showed him the footage. Clear, undeniable. He nodded. This qualifies as unauthorized entry, he said, and the financial attempt raises additional concerns. I understand, I replied. Do you want to press charges? He asked. The question hung in the air. Heavy, final. I took a breath. Not at this time, I said. He studied me for a moment. Then we'll file this as a report, he said. If anything else happens, you come back immediately. I will. When I left the station, I felt something shift again. Not relief, not satisfaction, something steadier, like a foundation being reinforced. That evening my phone rang. Michael. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello? There was a pause on the other end. Then his voice, quieter than I had ever heard it. I heard you went to a lawyer, he said. I didn't deny it. Yes, I replied. And the police, he asked. Another pause. Yes. Silence. Longer this time. Then, are you pressing charges? No, I said. I could hear the exhale. Sharp, relieved. But it didn't last. What are you doing, Mom? He asked. I leaned back in my chair. I'm protecting myself, I said. It feels like you're building a case against me, he replied. I'm building a record of what happened, I corrected. That's not how family works, he said. I closed my eyes briefly. We've already crossed that line, I said. Another silence. Then softer, I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't either, I replied. That truth sat between us. Unavoidable. I messed up, he said. The words were quiet, real, and for the first time, unprotected. I didn't respond immediately, because this was the moment I had been waiting for. Not the apology, but the recognition. You didn't just mess up, I said finally. You made choices. I know, he said, and those choices have consequences. I continued. I see that now, he replied. I believed him. Not completely. Not yet. But enough. What happens now, he asked. The same question. Different moment. Different weight. Now I said, you step back. Step back, he repeated. Yes, I said. No access, no decisions, no assumptions. And us, he asked. I paused. Because this was the part no document could define. That depends on what you do next, I said. Silence. Then quietly, I don't want to lose you. The words landed softly, but deeply. You should have thought about that before I said. I know, he replied. And this time, there was no argument, no defense, just truth. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I spoke again. I'm not closing the door, I said, but I'm not opening it either. What does that mean? He asked. It means you don't get the same access you had before, I said. Not to my home, not to my life. And if I earn it back? He asked. I looked around the room, at everything that had almost been taken. Then we'll see, I said. After the call ended, I sat there quietly, not moving, not thinking, just feeling. Because something had shifted, not resolved, not healed, but shifted. Michael had finally seen something, not everything, but enough to begin. And me, I had done something I never thought I would have to do. I had drawn a line between love and protection, between family and boundaries, between who I was and who I needed to become. I stood up and walked to the door. The new lock, the keys, still mine, still secure. And as I stood there in the quiet space I had fought to protect, I understood something with absolute certainty. This wasn't the end, but it was a turning point, because for the first time, I wasn't reacting to what was happening. I was defining what would happen next. For a while after everything happened, the apartment was quieter than I had ever known it to be. Not the peaceful kind of quiet I used to cherish, the kind Richard and I shared in the evenings, when words weren't necessary and presence was enough. This was a different kind of quiet, a reflective one, the kind that forces you to sit with everything that has changed. Days passed, then weeks. Michael didn't call as often. When he did, the conversations were brief, careful, almost tentative. Lauren, as far as I knew, was gone, whether by choice or consequence I couldn't say. And for the first time in a long time, no one asked about my apartment, my accounts, or my future plans. That absence should have felt like relief. And in some ways it did. But it also left behind something else. Space. And space has a way of bringing things to the surface. One afternoon, nearly a month after the engagement party, I decided to do something I had been putting off for years. I began reorganizing the apartment. Not because it needed it, but because I did. I started with the hallway cabinet, the same one that had been opened, searched, violated. I took everything out. Every folder, every document, every piece of paper that had once felt too overwhelming, too complicated, too distant to deal with. I placed them all on the dining table and sat down. For hours I went through everything, slowly, carefully, reading, sorting, understanding. It wasn't just about organizing, it was about reclaiming. Because for too long I had let certain things exist in the background of my life, handled by Richard, explained in passing, trusted but not fully known. Now I needed to know every detail, every protection, every choice that had been made on my behalf. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I found something unexpected. It was a small envelope, old, slightly worn at the edges, tucked between two folders I rarely opened. My name was written on the front, in Richard's handwriting. I froze. For a moment, I just stared at it, my fingers resting lightly on the paper as if touching it too quickly might make it disappear. I hadn't seen his handwriting in years. Not like this. Not in something meant just for me. My heart began to beat faster, not with fear, but with something deeper, something softer. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. I unfolded it slowly, and I read, "Bella, if you're reading this, it means something has changed. Maybe something we talked about. Maybe something we didn't. I've always believed in you more than you believe in yourself. That's not a criticism, it's just the truth of how deeply you care about others. Sometimes more than you should. That's one of the things I love most about you. And one of the things I worried about most, too. People don't always stay who they were, even the ones we raise, even the ones we trust. Life changes them, pressure changes them, and sometimes they make choices we never expected. If that ever happens, I need you to remember something. You are not helpless. You are not dependent. And you are not obligated to give up your life just because someone else believes they deserve it. This apartment, this home, it was never just a place. It was a promise that you would always have something that belongs entirely to you. Protect it. Not just the walls and the doors, but what it represents. Your independence, your dignity, your right to choose how you live. If anyone ever tries to take that from you, don't hesitate. You don't need permission to stand your ground. And you don't need to feel guilty for doing it. I trust you to know the difference between love and control. And I trust you to choose yourself when it matters most. Always, Richard." I didn't realize I was crying until the tears fell onto the paper. Soft, quiet, unstoppable. I sat there for a long time, holding the letter in my hands, reading it again and again as if the words might change. But they didn't. They stayed exactly the same. Steady, certain, true. Because somehow, he had known. Not exactly what would happen, not the details, but the possibility, the risk, the way life can shift in directions you never anticipate. And he had prepared for it, not just with legal documents, but with something deeper, with understanding, with trust, with belief in me. I placed the letter gently on the table and wiped my eyes. And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel like I was fighting alone. That evening I made tea and sat by the window. The same place, the same view. But everything felt different. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. I thought about Michael, about the boy he had been, about the man he had become, about the choices he had made, and the consequences that followed. I didn't excuse them. I didn't justify them. But I understood something now that I hadn't before. People don't always become who we expect them to be. Even when we raise them, even when we love them, even when we believe we know them. And when that happens, we have a choice. We can hold on to who they used to be, or we can respond to who they are now. I chose the latter, not because it was easier, but because it was real. A few days later, Michael came by. He didn't call first. He just knocked. I opened the door slowly. He stood there, hands in his pockets, looking smaller somehow. Not physically, but in presence. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I replied. There was a pause. Then, "Can I come in?" I considered it. Not emotionally, not impulsively, but deliberately. Then I stepped aside. "Yes," I said. He walked in quietly, his eyes moving around the apartment, not searching this time, not assessing. Just noticing. We sat in the living room, the same place where so many conversations had unfolded. But this one felt different from the beginning. "I've been thinking," he said. "So have I replied. He nodded. "I messed up," he said. I didn't interrupt. "I let things get out of control," he continued. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was building something. But I see now, I was taking something that wasn't mine." The words were simple, but they mattered. Because they were honest. And Lauren, I asked. He hesitated. She's gone, he said. After the party, everything changed. I nodded, not surprised. Do you regret it? I asked. He looked down. Every part of it, he said. I believed him. Not completely, not fully, but enough to see that something had shifted. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, he added. They won't, I said. I know, he replied. Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable, just real. I read something today, I said. He looked up. A letter Richard left for me. I continued. His expression softened slightly. What did it say? I held his gaze. That I don't need permission to protect what's mine. I said. He nodded slowly. You don't, he said. And for the first time in a long time, we agreed on something. That night after he left, I placed Richard's letter in a new envelope. Not hidden, not forgotten, but kept where I could find it. Because some things aren't meant to be stored away. They're meant to be remembered. And as I stood there in the quiet space that had been tested, challenged, nearly taken from me, I understood something clearly. I hadn't just protected my home. I had protected myself. And in doing that, I had found something I didn't even realize I had lost. My voice, my strength, my right to stand where I am and say, this is mine. It has been 6 months since that night in the ballroom. 6 months since everything broke open. 6 months since I stood in front of a room full of people and said without hesitation that my life belonged to me. Time doesn't erase things like that. It doesn't rewind them or soften them into something easier to carry. But it does something else. It reveals what remains. And what remains tells you everything. My apartment is still quiet. But now the quiet feels like it used to. Peaceful. Earned. The morning light still reaches across the living room floor the same way it always has. The same chair still sits by the window. The same photograph of Richard still watches over the space with a kind of steady presence I've come to understand more deeply than I ever did before. But there's something new, too. Not in the furniture, not in the walls, in me. Because I don't move through this space the same way anymore. I don't second-guess my decisions. I don't explain myself unnecessarily. And I don't apologize for protecting what is mine. That change didn't happen overnight. It came slowly. Through choices. Through boundaries. Through moments where I had to remind myself again and again that standing firm does not make you unkind. It makes you clear. Michael comes by once a week now. Always on Sundays. Always after calling first. The first time he asked, his voice was hesitant. Is it okay if I come by, he said. Not I'm coming over. Not I'll be there. A question. A small one. But important. Yes, I told him. Because that was the difference. He was asking. He wasn't assuming. He wasn't deciding. And that mattered more than anything else. The first few visits were quiet. Careful. We talked about simple things, his work, the weather, small pieces of life that didn't require us to touch what had happened. Not because we were avoiding it, but because we were rebuilding something that had been broken. And rebuilding doesn't start with the hardest part. It starts with the smallest ones. Lauren is no longer part of his life. He told me that about 2 weeks after the party. She left, he said. There was no anger in his voice, no bitterness, just acceptance. We wanted different things, he added. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. Because whatever had existed between them, it had been built on something that didn't last. And sometimes that's enough explanation. One Sunday, about 3 months in, Michael stayed longer than usual. We had finished lunch and he was sitting across from me at the table, his hands wrapped loosely around a cup of coffee. He looked different. Not just older, quieter, more aware. Mom, he said after a long pause, can I ask you something? Of course, I replied. He hesitated. Then, do you think we'll ever be the same again? The question hung there. Simple, heavy, honest. I took a moment before answering. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to be careful with the truth. No, I said gently. He nodded slowly as if he had expected that. But that doesn't mean we can't be something else, I continued. He looked up. What do you mean? I mean, I said we can build something new. Something that's based on who we are now, not who we used to be. He was quiet for a moment. Then, do you want that? I held his gaze. Yes, I said. Because I did. Not the old version. Not the one built on assumptions and unspoken expectations. But something clearer, stronger, more honest. I do too, he said. And for the first time, it didn't feel like hope. It felt like possibility. That doesn't mean everything is easy now. It isn't. Trust doesn't return just because someone apologizes. It returns slowly, piece by piece, through actions, through consistency, through time. There are still moments when I notice things. The way he looks at the apartment, sometimes not with entitlement anymore, but with awareness. The way he pauses before speaking as if choosing his words more carefully. The way he no longer reaches for anything without asking. Small things, but they matter, because they show change. And change is the only thing that makes rebuilding possible. Last week he brought something with him, a small box. I found this while cleaning out some of my old things, he said. He placed it on the table. Inside was a set of keys, old ones, worn, familiar. My copy, he said. I looked at them, then at him. I don't need them anymore, he added. The words were simple, but they carried weight, not just because of what they meant, but because of what they represented. Choice, understanding, respect. I reached out and took the keys. Not to keep them, but to acknowledge the moment. Thank you, I said. He nodded, and that was enough. That evening after he left, I walked to the door. The same lock, the same place where everything had shifted. I held the old keys in my hand for a moment. Then I placed them in a drawer. Not hidden, not discarded, just set aside. Because they no longer held power. Only memory. I made tea and sat by the window. The city moved outside as it always does, unaware, unchanged, constant. But inside, everything had been rewritten. Not erased, not forgotten, but understood. I thought about everything that had happened. The shock, the betrayal, the fear, the decisions, the boundaries, the consequences, and the quiet, steady work of putting something back together, not the way it was, but the way it needed to be. And I realized something. This story wasn't about losing something. It was about refusing to lose myself. Because in the end, that's what matters most. Not the apartment, not the money, not the things people think they can take, but the part of you that knows when to say, this is where it stops, this is where I stand, this is who I am. I took a sip of tea and looked around the room, at the life I had protected, at the space I had reclaimed, at the quiet strength that now lived inside me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was holding on to something. I felt like I was standing firmly within it. Because the door was still mine, the key was still mine, and more importantly, the choice was still mine. Always. Sometimes the hardest thing you will ever have to do is draw a line with someone you love. Not because you want to push them away, but because you need to protect yourself. We are often taught that family means sacrifice, that love means giving, forgiving, understanding no matter what. And while there is truth in that, there is also danger in it. Because love without boundaries becomes permission. Permission for others to decide for you. Permission for others to take from you. Permission for others to rewrite your life in ways you never agreed to. And the truth is, no matter your age, no matter your role, no matter your relationship, you are allowed to say no. You are allowed to protect your space. You are allowed to question what feels wrong. You are allowed to stand your ground, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. What matters is not whether people agree with your boundaries. What matters is that you honor them, because in the end, the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. So tell me, have you ever had to draw a line with someone close to you? Was it worth it? I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe, because sometimes hearing someone else's truth helps us find our own.